Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The way schools in England are funded is set to change. Under the current system, similar schools frequently end up with very different budgets. The government insists its changes will make the system fairer, but many of the schools who will lose out are not happy. Our education editor, Bramwyn Jeffries, reports on the winners and losers in Nottinghamshire.
For schools today, a reminder that geography matters. Tuxford Academy is in Nottinghamshire. The county has campaigned for a new funding deal. Pupils here didn't know the school gets less money than other areas.
I am surprised because they don't often share these kind of figures with us.
I think it is quite unfair because ultimately we should still get the same education, and I think the education here is really good.
I don't really see why they should get more money to spend on more things that we could use it as well. So.
Over time, big differences have opened up between funding in different areas.
So whether you're a child in Worksop or a child in Macclesfield or a child in Liverpool, why would there be a different amount of funding given to that child for their education?
For some, it's a simple question of fairness. More money per pupil can make a big difference.
So if you translate that times 1,700 children, you're talking as much as £1 million to £1.5 million difference. That is a significant number of extra teachers, a significant number of extra support staff.
At the moment, schools in the county of Nottinghamshire get about £4,300 per pupil each year in basic funding. But schools in the city of Nottingham get £5,300 per pupil. It's one of the best funded areas outside London. Under the new formula, the goalposts will shift. 10,000 schools are expected to gain a bigger share. To make that happen, some schools will lose up to 3% per pupil of funding. But every school in England is facing cuts because pupil numbers are rising. Today's plans move some financial pressure from schools in the countryside to those in cities. Parents at Ellis Guildford paid £40 this year towards laptops. In this deprived part of Nottingham, that's a big contribution.
For inner city schools, this couldn't have come at a harder time. They know the new funding formula might be fairer, but they're worried about the impact it will have on their pupils.
This school thinks it might end up with bigger classes.
You're going to be looking at some of those additional support personnel perhaps not being able to be funded. And I think that would be a really, really difficult situation for some of our youngsters who do have extremely challenging lives and backgrounds.
Wherever in England your child goes to school, this will affect them. Schools have to find massive savings. For some, that's just got a bit harder. For others, a bit easier. Bramwyn Jeffries, BBC News, Nottinghamshire.
Now, some of England's biggest cities, including London, Birmingham and Manchester, are set to lose out as the government announces plans for one of the biggest changes to school funding in decades. The Education Secretary, Justin Greening, set out proposals to shake up the national funding formula, claiming that current levels across the country were inconsistent and unfair. Unions say it does nothing to alter a chronic shortfall in budgets. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis reports from Gloucestershire.
Opened last year, the primary section of King's Oak Academy in Gloucestershire. In what many consider a vastly outdated postcode lottery of school funding, they're still working out here if they win or lose under the government's plans to completely rewrite the way English schools are funded.
What's been created over time is a funding system that allows similar schools with similar students to receive levels of funding so different that they put some young people at an educational disadvantage.
Currently, a school in Barnsley could receive 50% more funding if it were located in the London borough of Hackney. So the government wants a new formula, based less on past local authority allocations, where from 2018 most schools' budgets would be set nationally. The new formula, says the government, would lead to around 10,000 schools in England seeing an increase to their annual budgets, some by more than 5%, A similar number, however, would see a reduction in theirs, but the government insists by no more than 1.5% per pupil per year. Many schools in London and other big cities, for instance, would see their budgets cut.
We have reception over on the left-hand side.
A fairer, more transparent system is welcome, says the principal here in South Gloucestershire, but it's not the formula which bothers him so much as the health of the fund itself.
National funding formula is good for South Gloss, it's good for schools nationally, I believe, provided it is a national funding formula which is fair, which means that we've got, in order to make it fair, more money needs to go into the system.
The issue of not how the money is distributed, but rather how much there is in the first place, was raised today in a report by the National Audit Office. Their point that although the education budget has been protected, after you take into account rising costs, rising pupil numbers, the actual total amount of savings schools across England will have to make by 2020 equals £3 billion. The government, they say, has simply failed to communicate to schools the scale and pace of the savings needed. Today, 5 teachers' unions issued a joint statement claiming schools faced the biggest real terms cuts in a generation.
Everybody is facing cuts. Even the schools that were worst off before this are going to be even worse off at the end of it. The government has to put more money in, or class sizes across the country are going up, subjects are going to be lost, individual attention for our young people is going to go down.
The Department for Education has said that with appropriate support, schools should be able to make the £3 billion savings needed through more efficient ways of operating.